From CBS News in Washington, this is the CBS News Nightwatch.
It feels great, Charlie, and I'm grateful to the people who made it possible, those who voted to put the White House back on the side of working men and women.
Along with Al Gore, Michael Dukakis was celebrating Super Tuesday. So was Jesse Jackson, all big winners on the Democratic side, while it was George Bush for the GOP. Now to figure out what it all means.
Jesse Jackson is a player. He is a real player. He's not just, an interesting sidebar. He's carrying states. Jesse Jackson did a hell of a lot better on Super Tuesday than Bob Dole did.
Al Gore won himself the vice presidential nomination tonight.
Yeah.
Unless he chooses to go after the presidential nomination and attack full bold.
And when it comes to candidates looking their best, Dorothy Sarnoff is the consultant with presents.
Okay.
That says what?
Have I got presents?
No, it says I'm bored by all this, and this is really, I have no interest.
Have I got presents?
Yes.
All that, plus reaction from Al Gore, Jesse Jackson, Pat Robertson, and Bush campaign manager Lee Atwater. A look at how well the polls predicted Super Tuesday results. Comedian Harry Shearer with some primary punditry. Also, presidential controversy at the nation's only university for the hearing impaired. And looking for love in the golden years. Now, here is CBS News correspondent Charlie Rose.
Good morning. The Super Tuesday dust is settling, and there are not one, but four happy candidates this morning. The happiest may be Senator Albert Gore.
There's no doubt about one thing. This is a Super Tuesday.
Gore was the biggest surprise in the Democratic primaries, winning 5 states. Massachusetts Governor Michael Dukakis won the lion's share with 6 states, including Texas and Florida. And Jesse Jackson was close behind them with 4. Gephardt won only 1 state, his home state of Missouri. On the Republican side, Vice President George Bush swept the primaries, and he was making predictions about what it means.
For all of us, this is a major political victory.
I'm not running against Gore or Dukakis or Gephardt on Super Tuesday. I'm running against George Bush in the Super Bowl in November. I want to win.
Although Gore is a Southern candidate, until recently the pollsters did not expect him to have such a strong showing. Joining us now from Nashville, Senator Albert Gore. He is one of the big winners of Super Tuesday. How does it feel?
It feels great, Charlie, and I'm grateful to the people who made it possible, those who voted to put the White House back on the side of working men and women, bring the Democratic Party back to the grassroots, and make possible a new generation of leadership for change in this country.
How did you do it?
Well, I worked hard, and I had a lot of good people helping me, and I delivered a message that people responded to. You know, there come some times in the history of our nation when people are restless and eager to throw off the straitjacket that we feel like we're in sometimes and break out in a new direction. It is time for a new generation of leadership and the politics of the future rather than the politics of the past. I delivered that message and talked about jobs and economic growth, social justice, an intelligent role for this nation in the world, and people responded to it.
Let me interrupt because something else happened. I read reports in the last 4 or 5 days. Al Gore is not going to do as well as he expected to do on Super Tuesday. His strategy was wrong. He made the wrong bet. He has not caught on. Richard Gephardt is doing better in Texas and other places. It didn't turn out that way. What made the difference in the last 4 or 5 days of your campaign?
Well, I kept saying to the audiences I addressed and to the press people who were traveling with me that the conventional wisdom was about 5 days behind what was happening out in the field. And I was right about that. And what I was feeling was people eager for a new approach, for a chance to change this nation. That's really what happened. As the election approached, there was a very large undecided vote. And the field was smaller than it had been in the past. And people looked at the candidates, they looked at the choices, and they listened carefully to the messages that were being delivered. And I began to get a tremendously powerful response. And I really believed that as the time to vote neared, the undecided voters were going to respond to my effort to fight for average men and women and create fundamental change.
Let me bring this to your attention. You may not have had an opportunity to see this. This is Wednesday morning's Washington Post. It says, 2 weeks ago, Gore switched the emphasis of his campaign from the need for a strong defense and a strong U.S. role in world affairs to grassroots populist emphasis on economic issues. Asked Monday if Gore wished he had made the change sooner. A source close to the campaign responded, in retrospect, yes, we do.
Well, the message is the same one I've been delivering for the last 12 years in the House and Senate. I've fought a long series of battles for working men and women. And in the closing weeks of every campaign I've been involved in, I've always refined and sharpened my message and delivered it more effectively. I've continued to talk about a strong, intelligent role for this country in the world. But the emphasis has been placed a little more heavily on
economics.
On economics and on the basic elements of what my career has been all about. And
this, if I can interrupt you only because of time, and I know you're aware of that, this race, some say, is going to come down to a tough contest between you and Mike Dukakis, who also had a very successful Super Tuesday. He won Florida, he won Texas, 2 very big states in the collection, got a lot of delegates. There are those who say you have really got to go after him, no holds barred, and carry the battle to him. Are you willing to do that? Because they say the threat to that is that you may develop such enmity that you might not be on the ticket if Dukakis should prevail.
Well, I have no interest in being anywhere except at the top of the ticket, so that's not a concern or a factor. I guarantee you that.
You would not accept the vice presidency?
Well, I would almost certainly turn it down. I have no interest in it. I think George Bush is going to prove again this year that it's a dead-end job. No, I'm out to win this thing, and we're going to win this thing. And as for taking the race to Mike Dukakis, you know, the people of this country want change. And this is a contest now between the politics of the past, which he represents, and the politics of the future, which I'm articulating.
How can you
say that? I really
say
believe, if I could finish this just briefly, I really believe that his basic approach is so similar to the same approach that we took in 1972 and 1984, when we lost 49 out of 50 states. And we've lost 4 of the last 5 elections with the kind of approach that he represents. I think it is time for fundamental change. He has a budget plan that relies on a single gimmick, more tax collectors. He says there's no such thing as an underclass in this country. Well, I wish there was not, but there is. He's in favor of total production controls on agriculture, which are popular in the Iowa caucuses, but would be a disaster for the country. And where foreign policy and defense policy are concerned, he's had a whole series of statements that betray a total lack of experience. So I will not hesitate to outline and delineate the sharp contrasts between us.
In what state will you beat him?
Well, I hope to in several of them that follow.
A state outside of the South. I mean, you've done well in certain couple of states outside of the South. But what about Illinois? Can you beat Mike Dukakis and Jesse Jackson in Illinois?
Well, I hope so. We're going to take them one by one. Illinois is the home state not only of Jesse Jackson, but also of Paul Simon, who, don't forget, is
still in the race.
Still in the race, and a real factor in, particularly in his home state of Illinois. Then there are important contests in Michigan and Ohio, Pennsylvania and Connecticut, Indiana. We have got very strong organizations in those states. In New York, where I think we've got by far the strongest organization. Then we'll go to New Jersey and California, a lot of other states, Wisconsin.
And it will be decided before the convention.
I think so. I think that the chances for a brokered convention are probably greater now than they were before Super Tuesday.
I got about 15 seconds, Senator. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but go ahead.
The odds are still in favor of a clear victory before the first ballot is over. And if the people stick with me as they did tonight, it's going to be ours.
Thank you very much for joining us. It has been a big night for you, and we thank you for taking time to share your thoughts about the future of the campaign with us.
Thank you, Charlie.
Senator Albert Gore. Night Watch continues after this message. Super Tuesday was not Bob Dole's shining hour, a fact he knew going into the primaries. As George Bush forged ahead with a huge, delicate lead, Dole vowed to make a comeback in next Tuesday's Illinois primary.
We're going to be on the road to recovery in the state of Illinois.
But while the senator from Kansas may have gotten scalped in the South, he kept his sense of humor.
I want to congratulate the Vice President. He's had an extremely good day. He'll probably sleep better tonight than I will, but, you know, we have to take turns.
Joining us now from Houston is the Vice President's campaign manager, Lee Atwater. First of all, Lee, congratulations. This is a significant victory for the Vice President. How did you do it?
Well, I'll tell you how we did it. The Vice President got out, got around these Super Tuesday states, and took his message directly to the people. In the last week in South Carolina, he covered every corner of that state, went into all the congressional districts, talked about the issues, talked about why he wanted to be president. And the people heard him and saw him, and they liked what they heard and saw. And that's what happened in Super Tuesday. He's been out working these Super Tuesday states for a long, long time. And he's talking issues, he's talking directly to the people, and it just paid off. And I must say, this is a candidate for the Guinness Book. I don't think any candidate in the history of primaries have picked up this many delegates in one night, and I dare say no one else will do it again, because this may in effect be a one-time sale, one-time Super Tuesday deal, because I think the Democrats, who I have felt like for the last 2 years committed the boo-boo of the century, they're the ones that cooked up this idea. They've created a configuration that frankly was great for George Bush, great for the Republican Party, but bad for everybody else.
Well, why is it bad for everybody else? Because there are a lot of people who are saying that Al Gore, who did very well in the South, and that a lot of people who voted for Ronald Reagan, a lot of white men in the South, voted for Al Gore and gave him his victories in those states that he was successful.
Well, I don't disagree with that, and I think it was a fairly good night for Mr. Gore. But in the end, he's not going to get the nomination because the Democratic Party is still too liberal. And to get that nomination, you've got to run through a gauntlet of ultra-liberal special interest groups.
How do you...
And Gore's not going to be able to get that nomination. They're going to give the nomination to a liberal. Well, as a matter of fact, Gore's pretty liberal himself. But after all is said and done, this Super Tuesday did not do what the Democrats needed it to do. It's not going to give them a moderate or conservative nominee. It's going to give them the same type of big taxing, big spending liberal that they've always had. And it has given George Bush a tremendous, tremendous victory. And I'm so proud of him. I just can't tell you how proud I am of him, because he went out. This was his night, and this was his campaign, and he did exactly what he needed to do.
There were a lot of people going from Iowa to New Hampshire who were questioning a lot about the vice president. They were also questioning a lot about Lee Atwater and his strategy and the way he had managed his campaign, and the fact that Bob Dole had blown you out in Iowa with the help of Pat Robertson, had put you in third place. How sweet is it tonight, and what do you think it says, and what is it for you? What kind of victory?
Well, I'm proud of the vice president, because as a campaign strategist, people always second guess you, and you don't ever worry about that. But the candidate is really what counts, and the vice president proved tonight that he's the candidate that knows how to get out there with the people and get the votes.
And he was helped a lot because of Ronald Reagan and his identification with Ronald Reagan?
Well, everything helped. I think also it was very important that he was associated for the last 7 years with a tremendous record to run on. A record which includes getting interest rates down, getting inflation down, getting taxes down, getting government spending down, and getting unemployment down.
There are a lot of people, though, even now, when you have this great victory, who are saying George Bush can't win the general election. There are
going to be less of those people than you've ever seen before, and I guarantee you when polls come out next week, Senator Dole's argument about he's the most electable is a dud. Frankly, it's the same argument that President Rockefeller used in 1968 against Nixon. It's the same argument that President Glenn used against Mondale last year. It's the same argument that President John Connally used against Ronald Reagan. It was a dud for them.
But there are polls that show
it was a dud for them, and it'll be a dud for Dole.
There are polls that show some of these Democrats who have not yet had the commanding victories that George Bush has in head-to-head with George Bush beating him. How do you explain that?
Well, I explain it this way, Charlie. That was before tonight. Watch what these victories tonight do to the vice president. These early polls are all, I mean, they don't mean a thing. But watch what starts happening in the polls real quick. And I think Senator Dole's going to be looking kind of silly, because the issue he's been using is going to turn the other way very quickly. As a matter of fact, I'll predict right now there's going to be some polls taken in the next week or so, maybe even before Illinois, that shows that his argument just doesn't carry water anymore.
That George Bush has an appeal to independent voters and to some Democrats?
Yes, and I'll tell you something. We got the exit returns in South Carolina, and the vice president did much better than Dole or Robertson against independents, with independents and Democrats.
Bob Dole wants this nomination very badly. This may be his last shot.
About it.
You know,
no question about it.
He is going to come at you guys with everything that he has got. I mean, are you ready for this kind of hand-to-hand combat in Illinois? One state, not a bunch of them, where there's more of a concentration of resources?
Well, I'll tell you what Senator Dole better be rethinking. One of the things that I think hurt him badly, particularly in the last 3 or 4 days, because the vice president's numbers shot sky high in the last few days, is he made a big mistake by trying to interject the Iran issue into the campaign. Republican voters don't like that.
Lee Atwater from Texas. Nightwatch continues. Back in a moment. It was billed as Super Tuesday. Certainly American politics has never seen anything like it before. The numbers alone make it seem more like a general election than a primary day. It's going to take some time to sort everything out. We began that task this morning with Doug Bailey, executive publisher of the Presidential Campaign Hotline. Also with us, syndicated columnist Mark Shields. Welcome. Good to have you back.
Thank you, Joe.
Welcome, Mr. Shields.
Thank you, Mr. Rose.
The story of Super Tuesday is what?
George Bush, sweep. Absolute, thorough, total sweep. I confess I was wrong. I thought George Bush had a glass jaw in the sports parlance. He couldn't take a punch. He wouldn't get back up off the canvas after Iowa. Yeah. He did. He swept.
All right, we're on to the Republicans. You think the story of Super Tuesday is what?
Well, clearly George Bush.
But that was expected.
I think the other side is you can't have that kind of victory that Bush had without a total collapse of the Dole campaign. It frankly was a disaster. It was about the worst 10 days of a national campaign that I have seen. He has one chance, maybe one in a million, to get back onto the road in Illinois, and I think it's going to be one of the really interesting weeks of this year, is the Dole scrapping to get back into it. And I'm reminded, Mark, in 1984, when Mondale headed out of the South after a disaster. Gary Hart had won 7 out of 9 primaries. Wasn't quite as bad as today for Dole, but Mondale had to put it back together in Illinois. He had to do it. He fought with everything he had, and he did it.
Yeah, but thanks to also to mistakes by Hart and some campaign commercial business.
Which is the biggest hope that Dole has right now. George Bush is a candidate who, in prosperity, manages to maneuver himself into the most unlikely of political situations. Peter Hart once described him as the Harold Lloyd of American politics, the great silent film star, always ended up clutching onto the hands of a clock attached to a building for reasons, and no one ever figured out how he got there. And that really has been a problem with Bush in this campaign.
And he's back into the...
With all due credit to his campaign managers and the rest of the campaign, the candidate has been superb for the past 2 weeks.
For the past 2 weeks he has.
He hasn't missed a trick. The campaign hadn't missed a trick.
Well, what has he done that's so superb? Is it that he has...
No mishaps.
Avoided mistakes.
Avoided mistakes, and as Mark well knows, that's the first requirement of a good campaign, and maybe the only necessary requirement of most campaigns.
And the only hope that Bob Dole has going into Illinois is George Bush makes a mistake?
Well, I think that, plus the voters of Illinois need to recognize that this is it. They are picking, if they vote for George Bush, they're picking the nominee of the Republican Party, and frankly, George Bush, as nominee of the Republican Party, represents some real dangers because he has not been known as a particularly good candidate through the years. And secondly, he has some clear weaknesses, and some of the polls now are showing that some of these dwarves on the Democratic side, a few months ago they were called dwarves, and now beat George Bush in national polls. Pretty dangerous thing for the Republican Party to decide this early.
Speak to that as a Democrat.
Well, as a Democrat and as an American.
As a citizen.
George Bush in Illinois.
As a graduate of Notre Dame?
As a graduate of Notre Dame and honorable discharge from the Marine Corps on our side. But look at it. George Bush going in Illinois has problems because it's not the South. I mean, in the South, he did run very effectively as Ronald Reagan's co-pilot. And Ronald Reagan is immensely popular. I'd be willing to bet that Ronald Reagan's favorability is probably 20 points off in a state like Illinois that's suffered and had some tough
Part
times.
of it is agricultural country.
Absolutely. And that's right. And he's endorsed. And you get Peoria. I mean, you got places that are still hurting, that are industrial, great American heartland that is still suffering. In addition to that, you've got Jim Thompson, the governor, who carries with him some baggage after 12 years in office as governor, who's endorsing George Bush. And I think Doug is absolutely right that what they've got to look at, if you're a Republican, is George Bush hasn't won a race on his own since 1968. And that he's now running 13 points behind, according to the Presidential Hotline, which is a great source of information, in the field poll in California, running 13 points behind Michael Dukakis.
Yeah, but...
And he led him by 13 points just 90 days ago.
But does that ever make a difference with primary voters, this notion of electability? Do people vote because they think that he will not be a good general election candidate?
Going into Illinois It was 8-point margin, I think, as of today, okay? And so George Bush gets a bump. You get less of a bump as the time goes on. I mean, you really do. You get a big bounce and lift out of an Iowa or a New Hampshire. You get less out of Super Tuesday. You know, what we're talking about, I mean, you're talking about percentages.
Yeah.
No, I mean, the electability, it's one of the themes that Albert Gore kept emphasizing. The Democrats had lost 49-1. I mean, which is you know, it's an absolute statement of truth and reality, and they have been.
So therefore, they had to nominate somebody who was strong on defense.
That's
was
right.
his line.
Yeah.
I don't think the electability issue necessarily cuts against Bush very much. And frankly, if Dole wages in Illinois the kind of campaign he has waged up to this point of only attacking Bush, only attacking him, he can't do it.
Yeah, but
he
that's
must
been your-
lay out a positive program. And if he did, frankly, I think he'd have a chance.
Yeah, you've argued that on this broadcast since right after the Iowa caucuses, and the notion is what seems to be winning. But Bush does not lay out a message, does not lay out a reason other than a resume to vote for him, in contrast to any other candidate, does
Well, he ought to also, but the fact is he's the front runner. He's ahead, and the guy behind has got to give you a reason to support him.
And have a message.
And have a message, and he hasn't done that, and frankly, if he were to do that, I think he could stand a good shot in Illinois.
Well,
but the real difficulty, Charlie, is that having won Illinois, then he has to turn around and win virtually everything else, because Bush is so close now that it's almost within reach.
And does the bandwagon effect work on a situation like this?
Yes, but it also causes people to pause a little bit and say, my vote is really serious now because I'm picking the nominee.
We'll be back later in this broadcast and talk more about the Democrats with Doug Bailey and Mark Shields. Stay with us.
From CBS News in Washington, this is the CBS News Nightwatch. And here is CBS News correspondent Charlie Rose.
Welcome back. Super Tuesday proved a supercharge for George Bush. The vice president emerged with solid wins and a very impressive delegate count, leading by a wide margin over Bob Dole and Jack Kemp. On the Democratic side, the delegate pie was divided among Michael Dukakis, Jesse Jackson, and Senator Al Gore. The results leave Congressman Richard Gephardt only hoping for better days ahead. The same sentiment echoed by Republican Pat Robertson.
I never told you that it was gonna be easy.
This is not the end. This is just the beginning.
Joining us now from Atlanta, Pat Robertson. Where does your campaign go from here?
Well, Charlie, we have people who support me in just about every state. Upstate New York, and Pennsylvania, and Illinois, and Ohio, all over the place. I've got supporters. The question is whether I can mass enough of them together to win some delegates in congressional districts. But what I can do is get them active in the process and train up a tremendous force.
There are those who are saying, after George Bush's enormous victories in the South on Super Tuesday, that unless Bob Dole stops him in Illinois, he's going to be unstoppable, and that you ought to join with Bob Dole, you and Jack Kemp, in that effort. What do you say to those people?
Well, I think that Jack Kemp is going to endorse George Bush. They've been working together since Michigan, so I don't see Kemp joining in any Stop Bush coalition. I've been working along with Bob Dole. He's a good friend, but the truth is he doesn't have more than, say, 70 or 80 delegates max, and I will have more than that, but the two of us together don't have enough to stop George Bush unless something tremendous happens in these remaining states.
Are you hoping that George Bush will knock Bob Dole off in Illinois so that the race will then become Pat Robertson versus George Bush?
I'm hoping for Bob Dole to stay in and be strong, but the reality is that I believe he's out of money, and I don't think he's going to be that good in Illinois. He's probably 11 points behind Bush right now, and the chance of him getting any delegates is highly slim. So I want him to do the very best he can. I love to have him in the race, and I wish he were doing better so he could bring some delegates to the party, and the two of us would have something to go together with.
How close to victory is George Bush?
Well, a lot of things can happen, Charlie. As you know, between now and August, the press has this amazing facility of discovering things. I don't know what they'll discover, but they've discovered a whole lot so far.
While Super Tuesday dimmed Pat Robertson's presidential hopes, it provided a significant boost for the other reverend in the race. I talked with Jesse Jackson about the results. Congratulations on a very successful Super Tuesday for you.
Thank you very much.
What does it mean to you this night after this victory?
Well, it has great historic significance in that this very week, 23 years ago, there was the attempt to march from Selma to Montgomery for the right to vote. And of course, the horses, the cattle prods were turned out, and it was known as Bloody Sunday. The nation was determined for a breakthrough to end political violence. And now, 23 years later, there's a great determination to end economic violence. 23 years ago, it was more or less black versus white. But now black and white alike want to fight to save their farms. And family farmers are being abandoned. I've not offered family farmers commercials. I've offered them clear and present leadership. They're fighting now to save their jobs as these corporate barracudas close down the plants and make big profits and don't pay their share of taxes.
Let me interrupt you.
They've turned to me and they've found a friend.
And you think that that has made a difference in the perception of you in this campaign in contrast to the '84 campaign?
I would think so. More people feel free now when they want to fight back, to find a fighter. And I'm not a commercial. I'm a fighter. Maybe some people felt that when we marched in civil rights demonstrations, there was a quality of fight there. But then we brought Goodman back home from Syria. They saw another level of fight. Then family farmers asked me to help them at the farm auctions, and I did. Negotiated some of their land back. And the workers at Kenosha, Wisconsin, when Chrysler was about to close that plant, they reached out. And so the impression is now that whether farmers in Monroe, Louisiana, workers in Kenosha, Wisconsin, farmers in Chillicothe, Missouri, need a leader who will stand with them, reach out for Jesse Jackson.
Much has been said about the remarkable progress that you have made in your life. You and I have talked about it many times on this broadcast and in broadcast in Texas. The notion was that you were an outsider early on because of the color of your skin and other factors. But now, because of Super Tuesday, you have guaranteed yourself a place inside. Do you accept that, and how does it make you feel?
Well, Charlie, we have expanded the party. We are a bigger and better Democratic Party now. In 1984, I brought on 2 million new voters. When I sit on the stage to debate, there's no other Democrat that can say he has registered as many Democrats as I have. Democrats now have the U.S. Senate back. It was my registration in 84 and turnout in 86 that made it possible. So I've expanded the party. In my direction, end economic violence, that is now the Gephardt message. In part, the Dukakis message, end economic violence, stop drugs from flowing into our country, choose Head Start and daycare over jail care and welfare. That is solid family development construction.
Reverend Jackson.
My friend, that message is winning, and Jesse Jackson is going to win.
We hope to see you in Illinois. Thank you for joining us.
You will.
Thank you very much. Reverend Jesse Jackson from Houston, after a very successful Super Tuesday for him. Night Watch continues. Back in a moment.
Now that the voters have cast their Super Tuesday ballots, we'll hear what the tallies tell us. The director of CBS News Surveys is next on Night Watch.
Going into Super Tuesday, there was much speculation on how the South would vote. The black vote was all but conceded to the Reverend Jesse Jackson, but there were wild cards in the mix, such as Pat Robertson for the Republicans and Al Gore for the Democrats. Now that we have the numbers, we can turn to the director of CBS News Surveys for some analysis. Joining us now from New York, Kathy Frankovic. Welcome again, my friend.
Thank you, Charlie. It's nice to be back.
Tell me about Gore, because he seems to be the big surprise.
Well, this Super Tuesday was supposed to be a place, a time when Southern moderates could come back to the Democratic Party and find a candidate they liked. And Al Gore did manage to accomplish some of that. Over a third of the people who voted in the Democratic primaries today in the South had voted for Ronald Reagan in 1984, and Al Gore got the lion's share of them tonight. He carried conservative Democrats. He carried Democrats who are toying with the idea of voting Republican in November. I mean, he really did, I think, what Super Tuesday was hoping to do.
The idea was to bring those old-line conservatives back to the Democratic fold.
The idea was to bring them back. Now, we don't know for sure that they're going to stick with the Democratic Party come November, but an awful lot of them were voting today and tonight.
Why did they vote for Al Gore?
Well, it doesn't seem to be so much an issue thing. because what we see is that while Gore and Dukakis did well with those voters concerned with reducing the federal deficit, there was no real overriding issue motivating Southern Democratic voters. It may have been candidate perception. It may also have been the fact that Al Gore was from the South, although very few voters said that that's the reason they voted for him. But I think that what happened in the last few days was that Al Gore managed to capitalize on a lot of negative advertising that was directed against Dick Gephardt. Al Gore was clearly the moderate alternative.
That's the other side of the coin. Why did Dick Gephardt not do as well as he and some of his supporters had hoped? Because his message seemed tailored for the South.
Well, his message on trade didn't seem to get across. Just over 1 in 10 of the Democratic voters said that foreign trade was an issue that mattered most to them, and even those voters did not vote for Dick Gephardt. There is a rather sizable segment among Democratic voters who thinks that their community has been hurt by foreign trade, and Dukakis, Gore, and even Jesse Jackson did better with those voters than Dick Gephardt did.
Let me go to some of the other candidates. The Reverend Jackson, 95% of the black vote in the South.
That's right, and about 7 or 8% of the white vote in the South.
And who were those white voters?
They were, as we've seen before, they tended to be more educated, have better incomes than those white voters who didn't vote for Reverend Jackson. Jesse Jackson got over 10% of the white Southern voters with a college education. He got only about 3%, 4% of those white Southern voters who had a high school education or less. I want to stress, too, that in Massachusetts, that's completely outside of the South, but in Massachusetts today, Jesse Jackson was the second choice of white voters in that primary behind Michael Dukakis.
So he got more white votes than either Gore or whoever else was in it.
In Massachusetts, that's true.
Paul Simon.
I mean, he emerged as the second choice to Dukakis, really, in a lot of places in New England, and Massachusetts just adds on to that.
Michael Dukakis, he did well in Florida.
Michael Dukakis carried the Hispanic vote. In Texas,
which is it? Well, go ahead.
That makes sense. I mean, he does speak Spanish, and he did make a pitch for it, and he was successful. Michael Dukakis did well with older voters in Florida, and they made up nearly half the Democratic vote there. But I want to point out something about Michael Dukakis that's very interesting. The favorable, unfavorable evaluations of him are very, very good throughout the South, and even those voters who did not vote for him, those Democratic voters who didn't vote for him, tended to have a favorable impression of him. Now, that what makes him a little different than from any other Democratic candidate. People who didn't vote for Al Gore tended to have a negative view of him. People who didn't vote for Jesse Jackson clearly had a negative view of Jackson. That wasn't quite true for Dukakis. I mean, Dukakis looks very good in the South, even though Al Gore beat him in many Southern states.
Now, what does that say? That the sort of antipathy that is displayed by some Southerners against Northern liberals does not stick with respect to Michael Dukakis?
Didn't stick with these voters today, and may not stick further down the road.
Does it also say that Michael Dukakis has voters that are not strong or passionate about him? These are not voters that are going to vote for him regardless.
Well, we asked people how intense their support was for their candidate, whether they supported him strongly or with reservations or were really casting a negative vote. And for all the white Democratic candidates, strong support was limited to about half of their voters. For Jesse Jackson, strong support came from 3/4 of those people who voted for him. So Dukakis may not have overwhelming strong support from his voters, but neither did Al Gore, neither did Dick Gephardt
A lot
today.
of the story this week has been, in the last sort of 2 weeks of the leading up to Super Tuesday, has been about negative campaigning. Did negative campaigning have an impact?
Oh, I think it clearly had to. It's hard to trace it from this survey except by looking at late deciders and except by looking at the way the voters were evaluating the candidates. A lot of the negative ads were directed at Dick Gephardt. He was perceived, of all the Democratic candidates, he was perceived the most negatively by the voters today.
And he didn't have any money to rebut those charges,
no
so he
money
couldn't
to
go on the air.
rebut those charges, and you know, state after state, in group after group, even in groups that he should have done well in, he did not do very well today.
We're spending less time on the Republicans because that story was predicted and is a very obvious story.
It's across the board in every demographic group. George Bush is leading Bob Dole handsomely. There were only two categories of voters. We were looking at this earlier. There are only two categories of voters region-wide in the South where Dole ran even with George Bush. And those two categories were voters who are looking for strong leadership and voters who disapprove of Reagan's performance. So George Bush did very well, even among voters who don't like Ronald Reagan.
But it's interesting. Dole did not do well with those people, or he did do well with those people?
Those are the only two categories where Dole caught up to Bush. He didn't even beat Bush in those categories.
Because I remember our
voters.
surveys in Iowa showed that was the reason that people were voting for Bob Dole in Iowa.
People were voting for Bob Dole because they disliked Ronald Reagan,
and the leadership factor too.
And leadership. And this time around, not only were there relatively few Southern Republican voters who disapproved of Ronald Reagan, but even there George Bush did quite well.
Kathy Frankovich, you sure do make numbers understandable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our Director of Surveys, Kathy Frankovich. Nightwatch continues. Back in a moment. We are back with Doug Bailey of the Campaign Hotline and Mark Shields, syndicated columns in the Washington Post, frequently seen on public television on the McNeil-era Report. Democrats. Al Gore is the story, it seems. Jesse Jackson won, what, a number of states. Al Gore seems to be the surprise because a lot of people midweek of last week were saying it's Gephardt in the South and Gore's effort to sort of quick jumpstart his campaign is not going to work. What happened?
Al Gore ran very well with white males in the South, considerably better than anybody else. I think, actually, in fairness, you could say that there were three winners in the South and one major loser on the Democratic side. I mean, Michael Dukakis can point to the fact that he went in and carried Florida, carried Texas, did all those things. Jesse Jackson carried, I saw one estimate, 5 states. Are we saying 4 now?
Yeah.
But I mean,
No.
That's more than he carried, 5 times as many as he carried in all of 1984. I mean, Jesse Jackson is a player. He is a real player. He's not just, you know, an interesting sidebar. I mean, he's carrying states. I mean, Jesse Jackson did a hell of a lot better on Super Tuesday than Bob Dole did.
My point was a surprise, not so much that these people weren't equal winners and don't go full steam ahead, but the surprise was Gore. What happened in the end of the campaign? Because you had, over the weekend, I guess, a couple of sort of very silent or not enthusiastic endorsements from, on the one hand, Sam Nunn, on the other hand, Chuck Robb. Did something take place?
I think they're in all, with respect to other endorsements, Senator Boren, the governor of Georgia, Senator Johnston, all came in at the end in their states for Gore.
Well, did they come in because they knew what the polls were saying, or did they lead the polls?
I don't, no, they trailed the polls, but whether they knew what the polls were saying or not, I don't know. I assume that they knew, but it was all good news for Gore. The last 3 days, there was a heavy slide in the polls to Gore and away from Gephardt. I think part of the story was money. That Dick Gephardt did not have the money to compete as Dukakis had because he had a lot of money, and as Gore had because he didn't compete in the North.
Now, does it also mean that the negative campaigning worked against Dick Gephardt? For the first time, it began to stick?
Gephardt, and I think Doug is absolutely right, 97 media markets, okay? That's just not a term. That's 97 separate voting areas, metropolitan areas with their own television stations. You had to buy time to get your message out. You just couldn't campaign. It isn't like Iowa and New Hampshire, where you had that self-contained entity and the campaign was going, and if you said something in Concord, Doug was in Manchester and could answer it. It wasn't that.
But, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, that makes a tremendous difference. And the money, I think, really became a factor. Gephardt had a message that he needed to buy time to get out, his message of economic nationalism, because he was getting such lousy free media, and the papers were just banging his brains in on the flip-flops, okay? And yes, he was getting caught in a pincer movement between both Dukakis and Gore.
I think it's probably worthwhile, and somebody will do this research, how much money was spent on negative advertising against Gephardt versus how much money Gephardt was able to spend himself. He was probably outspent on the negative advertising against him, probably 3 to 1.
Doug is right. This is the first guy I've ever seen in the history of politics. Now, I'll ask Doug, because he headed up youth for Ike. But no, I would ask him this question. Have you ever seen a campaign where money, a candidate's money, was an issue, all right, and used negatively against him, where the candidate didn't have the money to answer the charges made against him?
That's right.
I mean, Dukakis was beaten in Gephardt's brains because Gephardt took PAC money, and the indictment was he hadn't taken enough PAC money that he could buy time to answer the charges made.
And to double the problem, Mark, when Gephardt tried to respond with a negative ad against Dukakis, what he was doing is spending money, his cherished TV money, to attack Dukakis and not put out his own positive message, which was the thing that was winning him votes.
That's right.
Yeah. He argues in interviews after Super Tuesday, Dick Gephardt did, that Illinois will be a different situation for him because it's one state and he can really get his message through again, and he will not have to go around 20 different states and answer charges. But it's tough because he has no money to go ahead, or because the sort of Gore is now a factor in
well, I mean, you got a whole bunch of stories coming into Illinois, all right? You got Jesse Jackson coming back home to Chicago. Jesse Jackson, a big winner. Paul Simon, Democratic senator from Illinois. Last stand, fighting for the Democratic Party establishment. Al Gore, what's he going to do up north? Is he going to go after Michael Dukakis? He's got the big choice to make tonight, Al Gore.
Wait, the choice he has to make is whether he goes into Illinois or not?
Al Gore's choice is this. Al Gore just shot his bolt. He's got nothing going anyplace else, except he's a hot political property now. Now, does he go after Michael Dukakis? Does he say, okay, I got a 1 in 10, 1 in 15 chance maybe of getting this nomination. So in order to do it, I'm going to take it right to the Duke. I'm going after him tooth and toenail. All right? If he does that, it might mean he's not on the ticket.
Yeah, let's raise the stakes. What Mark is saying is something I believe absolutely true. Al Gore won himself the vice presidential nomination tonight.
Yeah.
Unless he chooses to go after the presidential nomination and attack full bolt against...
Which he ought to do. Which he ought to do.
He ought to go for Dukakis.
He ought to go. Listen, I mean, the thing comes around so rarely in life. You think of all the great political figures and leaders in this country who never had a shot to be president. Yeah. And, you know, a day is a lifetime in politics and tomorrow is forever. Doug taught me that.
Well, you know, I wonder how many times Robert Dole has thought about that, because he had a shot at George Bush in New Hampshire. And as you say, the enmity there, and you got to know you're not going to give up on that dream easily.
It's the last chance for both Dole and Bush.
But do you think
Gore is not. I mean, he's been tough all along in this. I mean, he's been tough and aggressive in the debates. He's going to go for Dukakis.
He's not going to cease being aggressive. But I'm talking about, do you really take it to Michael Dukakis?
Well, how do you
say,
take it to him?
All right, you go after Michael Dukakis. Say, okay, Michael Dukakis, you've been pretty damn righteous, haven't you? Huh? Let's look at your voting record in 1960 when you were a liberal in the Massachusetts legislature, voting for racial balance and laws prohibiting drafting of or exempting the draft American for service in Vietnam of Massachusetts residents. I mean, things like that. You want to go through your contributions? I mean, anybody doing business with the state? Has there been any asphalt company that's contributed to your campaign? I mean, to listen to Dukakis, you'd think that you had to be Thomas More to contribute to his campaign. I don't think that's the case.
And if you do business with the state, you're automatically disqualified.
I don't know if anybody who's ever had a liquor license has ever made a contribution.
I think, however, it is true that Mike Dukakis was also a big winner tonight.
Absolutely.
Because he was a northerner who went south.
Absolutely.
He won the 2 biggest states in the South.
Yeah.
And he and Gore and Jackson will all be about equal in terms of number of delegates. He comes back north. He comes into Illinois.
Sure he does.
Comes into suburban Chicago.
Yeah.
And is a major player and probably the front runner.
Let me ask you this: do you think that the ticket, the nominee of the Democratic Party is either going to be Dukakis, Gore, or Jackson?
I'd say they're certainly the top 3 right now. Gephardt has probably one last shot, just like Bob Dole does. I mean, he's got to win.
But I'm not sure it has to be in Illinois. Dole has to win Illinois.
That's right.
Gephardt can pick maybe Michigan a couple weeks down.
So you wouldn't advise Gephardt to get discouraged and get out of this race at this point?
Well, there's nobody who's generated the kind of intense true believer passion of a constituency it's unshakable with the exception of Jackson. So, I mean, both Dukakis and Gore have soft support, so that it's liable, a serious mistake, which I don't expect Dukakis to make, could hurt him.
Charlie, you've heard me say this before. Let's not leave out Mario Cuomo. I know people say it's not possible, that can't happen, but it wasn't possible for Al Gore to jumpstart a campaign in the South. So many things that are impossible.
I got to get out of here. I also remember a lot of people right after Iowa who were reading George Bush's obituary, and now he looks much stronger. Thank you, Mark Shields included.
I thought he
Thank
was
you,
gone.
Doug Bailey. Nightwatch continues. Stay with us.
Super Tuesday left some folks with plenty to smile about. We'll hear why it has comedian Harry Shearer laughing as well when Nightwatch continues. From CBS News in Washington, this is the CBS News Nightwatch. Now here is CBS News correspondent Charlie Rose.
Welcome back. As Super Tuesday heads into the history books, the numbers continue to pile up. The Republican wearing the biggest smile, Vice President George Bush, a clear-cut winner across the board. For the Democrats, it was more of a three-way split, with Michael Dukakis and Jesse Jackson and Al Gore dividing up the delegates and the victories. Now, usually politics, as most of you know, is for the candidates a serious affair. But on Tuesday night, even the candidates, said by some to lack warmth, left them laughing.
Every year at about this time, the governors meet for the midwinter meeting in Washington, and we are invited to the White House by the President and the First Lady. I got to confess to you that this time,
from CBS News in Washington, this is the CBS News Nightwatch. Now here is CBS News correspondent Charlie Rose.
Welcome back. As Super Tuesday heads into the history books, the numbers continue to pile up. The Republican wearing the biggest smile, Vice President George Bush, a clear-cut winner across the board. For the Democrats, it was more of a three-way split, with Michael Dukakis and Jesse Jackson and Al Gore dividing up the delegates and the victories. Now, usually politics, as most of you know, is for the candidates a serious affair. But on Tuesday night, even the candidates, said by some to lack warmth, left them laughing.
every year at about this time, the governors meet for the midwinter meeting in Washington, and we are invited to the White House by the President and the First Lady. I got to confess to you that this time we were looking the place over a little more carefully than we had been the other night. We went into the East Room, and I kind of looked around to see if maybe it's going to be ready for a few Greek dances on the 25th of March, 1989.
We continue to look at the lighter side of Super Tuesday with a man who's joined us before on Night Watch. Comedian Harry Shearer joins us from Los Angeles, and we are pleased to have him. A little humor from the normally, what do we say?
Straight-laced.
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 Governor of Massachusetts, not known for having wit.
You know, Charlie, it's interesting. At this point in time, it looks like the guys who write comedy for the candidates are the only writers who are allowed to work these days, you know? I am, of course, with a strike and being in the union, I couldn't write down any thoughts that I might have had.
So these are coming right, these are kind of right off the top of your head, sort of the purest form of wit and wisdom.
Actually, I'm channeling the ironic observations of the late Elvis Presley tonight. That's what I'll be doing.
Listen, I know you love politics. Did you love Super Tuesday? Did you find it satisfying for that political junkie need of yours?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I did. I find it very hard to believe that a public that pretends to be bored to tears with things like Super Tuesday, but then cheers when a president says, but we'll fight for democracy anywhere else. This is what democracy is like. It's stupid and boring and dumb and wonderful. My particular taste for irony was pleased by the fact that this whole game was started by guys who said, let's get a lot of primaries in the southern states and we'll end up with a conservative Democrat. And what they ended up with was Jesse Jackson and a pseudo-conservative in Al Gore. Basically, what it did was enrich the television stations in the southern states and a lot of ad guys.
Oh, 97 of those television markets.
And that's always good, you know? It's always good to keep the money flowing into the affiliates, isn't it, Charlie?
Yes, it is. We're very anxious for them to do well.
Yeah.
Any interesting moments for you?
Well, to me, so far, the most interesting statement of the campaign, unfortunately, or the most memorable, was the guy who sat out of Super Tuesday, Senator Simon. I cannot get it out of his mind when he said, and I'm just approximating here, I'm not running for president because I want to live in a big white house. You may remember him saying that over and over and over again, and it just made me think, guys always deny what it is that someone's accusing them of. So somewhere there's a memo, you know, where he's plotted to live in a big white house, and that's the whole secret of the campaign. The best... Let me back up for a second. You know, a lot of criticism of the media for not paying enough attention to issues during the campaign, but if you look at the Democratic results on Super Tuesday, the black guy won the black votes, the white Southerner won the white Southern votes, and the ethnic won all the ethnic votes, so who cares about issues? The point is that the best campaign headquarters on Tuesday night was Dukakis, with all those monitors in the background.
Yes.
That looked great. I'd vote for a guy who could own that many TVs.
It's the impact of high tech right there, huh?
Oh, yeah. You know, very contemporary. I would say that George Bush basically had the best strategy for a Southern primary, which is to pick a fight with Dan Rather. I think that he's proven that that's really the way to get votes down south, is just to get Dan's hackles on end.
Now, what about Bob Dole? What do you think of his campaign so far and where he might go from here?
Well, I think the best decision he made, which was one that I guess he shared with George Bush, was not to do interviews on election night. Anybody like me who's a real political junkie has gotten so sick and tired of dialing around the networks and seeing the candidates pop up magically in the same hotel room on each of the three networks saying the same thing. I think since the whole campaign now is a media campaign, they should just get smart and say, okay, I'll have a statement for CBS, a statement for NBC, a statement for ABC, and maybe mush a little of the three together for CNN, but have a different election night statement for the networks if they're going to do interviews. I think, barring that, Dole made the right decision by shutting up.
Do you think people are bored by all this?
Well, yeah, as I say, I think it's silly that a country that can be mesmerized by the Super Bowl can be bored by something that's...
Democracy.
Yeah, by democracy. Sad, isn't it? Sad commentary. But we'll fight for it, Charlie. We'll fight for this damn democracy.
You bet we will. Now, what about this Hollywood community? Have they gotten involved, caught up, selected their candidates?
Yeah, there's a lot of fundraising going on out here. Hollywood is a town that candidates now fly into, have a party, raise money, and get the hell out as quickly as possible because they don't, you know... Something that, especially guys like Gore who come here and, you know, if they stay any more than 12 hours, they might do something that offends Tipper, so they're definitely going to stay out. I want to say something about Representative Gebhardt, who was the big loser on Super Tuesday, who I guess proved beyond the shadow of doubt that a trade policy is no substitute for eyebrows.
You better explain that because a lot of people don't know that
there
was some involvement by question about his eyebrows.
Yeah, he was told to darken his eyebrows.
To darken his eyebrows because it didn't come across on television.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, what about, have you had any favorite candidates?
Also,
go ahead.
Yeah, also, the other thought about Gebhardt that I had was that he made a strategic arithmetic miscalculation, which is he ignored the fact that more people buy Hyundais than build Buicks. And I think that was the death of his campaign. Did I have a favorite candidate? The guys I liked were, you know, these eccentrics that are wrung out by the first caucus.
Like?
Well, Bruce Babbitt and Pete DuPont, guys who have the nerve to say things like, we're going to raise your taxes and we're going to get rid of your Social Security. Get them out of here! We don't want to hear that.
What about Pat Robertson's candidacy so far?
I think the main problem with Pat Robertson's candidacy is he hasn't made enough outrageous statements. I think he started late. You know, he knew that would appeal to people in the South, but he just didn't get into it fast enough. And I think What he's got to do is, you know, start predicting the rapture before the California primary.
Yes.
And really go on the limb. You know, he's been trying to hide this stuff, and I think he should bring it out in the open and fly it as his personal flag.
Who do you think is most presidential?
Among the candidates,
Yes,
you mean?
sir. Yeah, well, no, among their aides.
Well, because I think Peter Graves is the most presidential guy I can think of at the moment. Well, that's a loaded question, Charlie, because it tends to sound like an endorsement or
Oh, I know, and they're all looking for your endorsement to get them over the hill.
Well, you know, they've been calling me.
Yeah, I'm sure they have. I've got the Shira voters all wrapped up.
Let me put it this way. I think the Dukakis thing impresses me most because my experience at sporting events is America likes sporting events and Hollywood is America likes guys named Duke.
Yes.
They look up to the figure, and they also like going Duke. Yeah. You know, they do that at games a lot. Boo.
Well, that's if the Blue Devils are playing.
Yeah. So I would say, from that standpoint, if he could just, again with the eyebrows, you know, trim them a little bit. I think if Dukakis could send half his eyebrows to Gephardt, we'd have a real horse race.
Well, do you think it's going to be an exciting general election? Do you see the makings of something we can get excited about?
Yeah, to me, there's no such thing as a boring general election. You know, we're talking about the history of the country and the world, all, you know. I mean, yeah, there's more important stuff like how to get the car started in November, but I think it'll be exciting. Yeah, I'll be around.
Well, we look forward to talking to you. Thank you, Harry.
Thanks, Charlie.
Harry Shearer, acting without a writer. Nightwatch continues. Stay with us.
Huffing and puffing. It could help the next time you have an attack of nerves. Learn from a woman who's counseled the candidates. Next.
And at the same time you're contracting here, let's do it together. You go, shh, okay?
Modern politics isn't just based on what you say, but how you look as well. So you don't see Bob Dole wearing baggy brown suits anymore. Michael Dukakis has toned down his hand gestures, and former candidate Bruce Babbitt learned not to smack his lips. Making a good impression is crucial for any candidate. It can make or break a campaign. The same goes for anyone really, whether they are applying for a job or meeting a client. Dorothy Sarnoff is the founder of Speech Dynamics Incorporated. Her advice is followed by politicians and executives alike. Her latest book is called Never Be Nervous Again. Welcome.
Thank you. So glad to be here with you.
It's nice to have you.
You have such an up personality. It's a great feeling for this hour of the morning.
What's the message here? Never be
The
nervous
message
again.
is that overnight, in 24 hours, you can learn 5 intelligent anticipation actions that will prevent you from ever being nervous again. Now, I've worked in one way or another in 14 countries with over 70,000 people, and we've said, if you do what we ask you to do in the book, and it doesn't work, you get your money back. That's not from the book, that's from the courses, which is a lot more money, and we've never had to give the money back.
Does this book incorporate the courses?
The book is a $1,695 version of a $3,600 course.
All right, well, let's find out what's in this book, for goodness sakes.
Well, absolutely foolproof control of nervousness through the physical control and the mental control. And I just have to tell you, since you happen to be, I think, a Yul Brynner fan, or were a Yul Brynner fan, that when I was in The King and I really started the discovery of this, because I saw Gertrude Lawrence sweating every night before she had to sing, and I died 1,000 deaths with her through her nervousness. And I said, one day I have to find a cure for nervousness that's going to help people not have to suffer that. And I was in the wings with Yul Brynner waiting to go on, and I saw Yul there pushing the wall, and he was going, and I said, Yul, what do you do that for? And he said, it helps me control my nerves. I never get butterflies, I never get nervous. So I did it, and sure enough, I never got accelerated heartbeat again, never got the sweats, never got nerves.
Now, what, he just stand there with his hands and push against
It was pushing in. So, well, listen, when you push against me for a minute. What happens to these muscles in here when
they
you put...
tighten up, don't
Exactly. They contract like mad. So I did it, and I said, now, when I became a public speaker, I can't say to the chairman, excuse me, I feel a little shaky, I've got to go push a wall.
That's right.
So I said, what was I doing when I was pushing that wall in a way that I can do, that nobody will see, but will have the same absolute control of nerves? And I found out that
Breathe deeply.
No. You just hit the first big fallacy. Breathe deeply. Charles, take a deep breath. Put your hand on your larynx. Take a deep breath. Tell me what happens here when you breathe deeply. Let's go.
Nothing happens there. It comes in here. My diaphragm expands.
But I'm going to take that one up later. But what happens here? It gets tense, doesn't it? Take a deep breath through the mouth. Right? You get tense. So you're...
Okay, I'll go along with it. It gets tense.
You believe me.
Okay.
For the moment.
All right.
What we want is tension, not tenseness. Body tension for attention.
Right.
So
what you're doing here is...
We're doing this on exhalation. So if you put your hands together, and any of our viewers who are not in bed, if they want to sit on the edge of the bed and do it with us, it really is worth knowing about.
At a bar.
You push this very hard.
Like isometrics? What is it?
Exactly. You have an isometric here, you have an isometric here, and at the same time you're contracting here. Let's do it together. You go, okay? But you can't get up while you're waiting to do a talk, or while you're waiting to go in to do an interview or the PTA and say, shh. So you do the same thing here without this business going on. You leave your lips gently parted, and you contract like mad on exhalation, and that contraction of those muscles prevents the production of the negative chemical that you would have sent into your physiology to make you nervous.
A negative chemical?
Well, what is adrenaline?
A positive chemical.
Positive chemical. Right. And that you produce over here, and this contraction doesn't bother. It helps you produce adrenaline.
Right.
But when you contract here, you prevent the production of the negative chemical, which is not adrenaline, that gives you the shakes, the dry lips, the quivering throat, and all the other manifestations that say, he's nervous.
That's right. And if they feel that you're nervous, they feel
Just
like you're
contract.
not in command of what you're doing.
Absolutely.
And you create an unease with the audience.
Well, it's like, have you ever been in the opera and you hear a soprano 8 notes before she's going to reach the high note, and you're sitting there this way with her because you know she's scared to death of the high note. But this Sarnoff squeeze,
Sarnoff squeeze has a name, does it?
Yeah, I loved it with the SS. The SS, the Sarnoff squeeze, is the physical control of nervousness.
Yeah. All right, what else? That's lesson 1.
That's lesson 1. But now we get to the mental control of
Yes.
nervousness. That involves 4 phases of preparation, which are very detailed in the book, but very simple. Because actually what I did with this book was put all the questions that I had ever been asked in my teaching anywhere around the world about nervousness.
It's all right here in this book.
And I gave all the answers. So
the answers and the questions.
Well, the questions are there because the answers are there because of the questions, but they're the most commonly asked questions that probably these people out here tonight are saying.
Okay.
You know.
In other words, if we talk about these questions, we're going to answer the questions that are most on their mind.
Yes.
What are the questions?
Well, number 1, do I have to rehearse?
Answer?
Do I? do. You have to rehearse. You have to rehearse at least 4 times aloud. But here's the clue. As though in the real-life situation, seeing the most skeptical of faces in front of you, the last time before, as close to delivery time as possible. Why? Because then what you've got on the lectern, or if what you've got in front of you as you go for your interview, or if you're going to speak to the PTA, is very familiar to you. Just
I'll tell you a
visually.
story. I heard a friend of mine was in the office of one of the most powerful men in the American government recently, and she told me that she heard as she walked in the office, he was speaking loudly, and he was practicing a speech.
Yeah.
He was rehearsing a speech.
Because that's where you find your timing, isn't it?
Right.
Now, when you go
timing and familiarity with material, so that it becomes
Absolutely.
an extension of you, as if you're reaching inside to get
Yes.
it, rather than picking it up off a page.
Now, what we did, in addition to saying just rehearse, I invented something called fast food for the eyes.
What's that?
Which is, you know, most people's speeches look, excuse me.
All right, go ahead, take that.
Something like this, but only not as good as this. The paragraph rambles all over the page.
Right,
and so,
right.
so you're talking, so you have to read, and you go up and down, you go up and down. You never really communicate with the audience.
So what do you suggest to get around that?
We designed
Fast
something.
food for the eyes.
The eye has only one place to go every time. That's margin left.
Yeah.
And you, even if I'm looking at you and I've got my finger margin left,
so your
where my
finger's
eye
going
is
down the
due, down margin left, I see where my eye is due next.
Yeah.
So I can spend 90% of my eyes up looking at you, and 1/10 going down.
Let me talk first about public speaking and then
Yes.
about television. And we'll talk about some other advice she has given to some American politicians. And we'll finish our little lesson back in a moment when we return. More on speech. Stay with us. Dorothy Sarnoff is here. Now, let me ask you something about clothes. Do you always wear red on television? Because most people believe that blonde women look great in red on television.
I have a poem.
Yes, okay. Let's hear it.
In red, you're ahead. French blues for you. Green's in between, unless you're a redhead, and then you look great in green.
Yeah.
Brown is down, and that goes for men and women and President Reagan.
But they say that President Reagan has brought a new popularity to brown suits.
I thought brown suits have brought a new lack of popularity to brown suits.
Well, speaking of brown suits, tell me about the advice you gave to Bob Dole.
Well, it was very simple. He came in and he started to do a talk, and he leaned on the lectern, cradling his war-wounded arm. Right. And I work my own camera in my office.
You go up to your office and you have this little
camera set up there, and they sit
I don't have a little camera
a big
set.
camera.
I have a camera set up. And I photographed him that way. And then we had a discussion. And then I asked him to stand the way he has been standing, which is the way other people stand. And I showed him which one did he prefer. And obviously, standing erect did not call attention to the war-wounded arm. And he told me that a director had told him to lean on that arm and hide it, and in that way, nobody would look at it. Well, that was exactly the worst advice he could have gotten.
Absolutely.
So from then on, it was this stance at the lectern, which is, of course, much better for him.
And what did you tell him about his brown suit?
We discussed grooming and suits, and the fact that his suits fit up here the way your suits fit. You know, they used to fit a little bit back here.
Oh, they would do this?
Something like that, right?
Now, what about the other candidates? When you look around at Dukakis and Gephardt and Al Gore
Their
and
suits
Jesse
fit
Jackson,
very well.
what do you think of them? They're all doing very well in terms of the way they present themselves?
You know, it's very interesting. The longer they go, the better they get. Most of them. Isn't that true?
Sure.
It's as though they're rehearsing a lot, and they're finding and their staffs are finding things that are positive to accentuate.
Did anybody from Walter Mondale's office ever call you?
Well, once, during the convention in '80, I had got a very, very frantic phone call saying, Mr. Mondale is all upset. He's practically hysterical. Run right over to the hotel. And I went to the hotel. He had never used a teleprompter before. And the teleprompter that he was going to use had black letters on a white transparent, on a transparent background. Therefore, when he was looking to pick up the letters, he picked up the heads of the people in the audience too, so that the letters got all confused. He couldn't pick them up fast. And all I simply counseled was, make the background black so that you don't see the heads, and the letters white, and that was the end of it.
So
and then he stopped being upset.
As soon as he could see it well, he felt comfortable and he could go ahead.
So my life in business can very often be little tidbits of counsel that make a lot of difference. I say I'm in the business of little things mean a lot.
But the little things go all to the central point of, one, the overall presentation, the presence, the word that you really like, right?
Yes. Without it, are you anybody?
Meaning what?
Without presence, you can be beautiful, you can be brilliant. Do you remember Adlai Stevenson?
Of course I do.
Did he have presence?
Yes.
No. He had presence in a room. Did he have presence?
Everybody that was said
did he
that
have
he was
presence
a delightful
on the air?
dinner companion. He was wonderful to talk to.
Yes, but did he have
engaging.
It on television?
Oh, you mean on television?
Yes.
I can't answer your question truthfully because I never really studied him on television.
I had a very interesting experience. I was playing the Drake in my former career. I don't know what you know about me.
I do. More than you'd like to know.
Oh, more than? No, I don't think more. I think more than
you'd
think
I know.
You'll have to see you later. But anyway, I was playing the Drake Hotel in Chicago doing nightclubs. He and I had the same press agent. And the press agent said, you two just have to meet and talk. So I met for 3 hours with Stevenson in his office, and we discussed everything. We had a marvelous discussion time. I left to go back to my hotel to put my makeup on to do my act, and I felt, I was all worn out.
What did he do?
I was worn out with his self-doubts.
Really?
Which meant that there was no presence there that said, I can do it. Now, actually, did you ever try to analyze what gives the message of presence?
What does?
Okay.
That says what?
Have I got presence?
No, it says I'm bored by all this, and this is really, I have no interest.
Have I got presence?
Yes.
Presence is absolutely the product, a physical product.
But let me defend Adlai Stevenson for a second. Adlai Stevenson was witty.
Oh,
people
brilliant.
will tell you one of the most delightful speakers they ever heard.
Right.
Great wit, charm, they said. Now, I never met him, so I'm only...
Intellectual.
This is all...
Intellectual.
But stimulating to be with. And you're saying, well, because he didn't have the right presence, he didn't communicate to me.
Here's a man who...
Tell me about Ronald Reagan. All this talk about the great communicator. Is he that good? Is he that much better than everybody else?
When Ronald Reagan has the teleprompter here and the teleprompter here, and he picks up the phrase and he passes the phrase across so that he is eye-sweeping you and really eye-clicking with you as he goes, that's the best of speech-making, number one, because his eyes are really clicking.
Right.
Many speakers' eyes just sweep over you and they make no connection at all.
That's what I meant about finding somebody in the audience that And if it's a television camera, make sure that you're thinking that you're talking to someone.
No, not think you're talking to somebody. Talk to someone.
Listen, it's a pleasure to have you. Much success, continued success to you.
Thank you. I've loved this.
Thank you.
You're terrific.
Dorothy Sarnoff. Never be nervous again, she says. Nightwatch continues, and we hope you'll stay with us.
Should the president of a university for the hearing impaired be hearing impaired? The Gallaudet controversy when Nightwatch continues. From CBS News in Washington, this is the CBS News Nightwatch. And here again is CBS News correspondent Charlie Rose.
Gallaudet University here in Washington is the nation's only university for the hearing impaired. It has never had a hearing impaired president since its founding in 1864. Students had hoped such a precedent would be set with the naming of a new president. It didn't turn out that way. The school board has named Elizabeth Ann Zinser as president. Of the three finalists, she was the only one not hearing impaired. The selection has prompted a chorus of student protests. This morning, we hear from both sides. Dr. Zinser joins us from North Carolina. That's where she is currently Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs at UNC Greensboro. Serving as her interpreter is Ed Troyer. Greg LeBlanc is the student body president at Gallaudet. His interpreter is Janet Bailey of Sign Language Associates. I want to welcome all of you here because clearly this is a controversy that involves a lot of people who care about education and who care about a sensitivity and understanding of what it means to be hearing impaired. I want to first turn with the notion that what we're here to is to try to understand how people feel about this, and perhaps through that have a greater understanding of where it might be going. First, Greg, you, tell me about yourself. How long have you been hearing impaired, about your parents, about what Gallaudet means to you?
Okay, I have been deaf since birth, and I have grown up deaf. I'm from a deaf family. My mother is an alumnus of Gallaudet. And I've always looked up to Gallaudet College, well, now it's a university, since I can remember, because it's the only liberal arts in the world, liberal arts college in the world, and I've always looked up to that. And what happened 2 days ago, I don't know how I'm going to be able to look up to Gallaudet University now.
Why is it so important for you to have a hearing impaired president?
Because we feel that we need a role model. Everyone looks up to Gallaudet University. And once we have a hearing-impaired president there, it's going to make things change. And many people will look to that deaf person as a capable person, someone who, if we can select a hearing-impaired person, then that person's going to become a role model for everyone. Because we feel that we need to educate many more people, saying that deaf people are capable of many things.
Elizabeth Hensenza, you are highly regarded as an educator, Vice Chancellor at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. Understanding the symbolism of this for some of these students who respect you, but care greatly for the symbol and for the role model, what do you say in response? I know it is an issue that you have grappled with.
Let me begin by saying that I would like not to have a conversation over the news with the students and the campus community there at Gallaudet University. I wish to have that conversation in person on the campus and have made that clear as we have made arrangements for these communications. But I would like very much to share with you my own enthusiasm about being invited to join the Gallaudet University community as president, my confidence that the future of the university is great, and my understanding that the university represents a tremendous symbol of greatness for the deaf community and is a great university in the higher education community in general. I definitely understand and appreciate the feelings on the part of some of the students and some of the friends of the university who are deeply disappointed that their 7th president is not deaf. But I do believe that as I gain an understanding with their help about deafness and deaf education and the deaf culture, and as I learn and develop a command of the language, that we will come to be friends and colleagues and move on with the business of what is one of the most exciting opportunities in my life, and certainly a university that deserves to continue to have the finest reputation throughout the world.
Having said that, and understanding and respecting your wishes to speak to the students directly and to be able to have that kind of dialogue with them, you must have given lots of thoughts to this. And how did you resolve it in your own mind to go ahead knowing that these questions were raised?
I resolved it in my own mind by believing in the Board of Trustees. Any Board of Trustees of a great university has the legal responsibility and authority to make a judgment about policy and about the selection of a president for the university. No decision is more monumental than the decision of the president of the university that concerns them. I have confidence in the Board of Trustees, and I know that they were acting in the best interest of the university. I understand that it was a very difficult decision, but I have faith in that, and it's in their faith in me that I approach the university with confidence and with enormous sense of privilege, again, in being invited to participate in the leadership of the institution in the decade ahead.
Yeah. But what do you say to this issue of the role model and that heartfelt feeling on the part of students?
I do understand that and believe that the deaf community needs more and more role models in policy making and leadership positions, and I would take it upon myself to be a strong advocate for that responsibility. Gallaudet University, now that it is formally named a university, takes on new and exciting challenges, one of which is the professional advancement of deaf individuals in leadership positions all across the country, and including, and most particularly, at Gallaudet University. I would consider it very much my responsibility to help to prepare for the future so that increasingly deaf individuals are placed in a position where they are able to command the positions of leadership within the policy-making environment.
Okay. Greg, clearly Dr. Zinser is a highly regarded university official and an administrator. The Board of Trustees had an opportunity to carefully consider people who were both hearing impaired and her, who was not hearing impaired. Don't you think they had the best interest of the university in mind when they made their decision and felt that this person had such superior qualifications that she was the perfect and the best choice to lead the university?
No. I want to point out that Dr. Zinsser has not been invited by Gallaudet University. She was only invited by the Board of Trustees. And the Board of Trustees are not really ready to work with the hearing impaired president. I feel that they picked a hearing president for one thing. And we do not need a hearing president to lead the deaf community. We need to promote other deaf people. We don't need a hearing president to do that job. We could have a deaf president to do that job. Okay. And there's really no difference. For Dr. Zinsser's information, she can't pick up and understand the deaf culture or deaf education and the factors leading to deafness. It takes a long time and a lot of energy, and it can take years and years. And since you have no deaf education or deafness background, it's not easy. It's not easy for you to understand deafness. It's going to take years. As you say, before this, it took you some time to understand us, and you're not going to be able to do that.
Let me take a break, and we'll be right back talking about this controversy and this challenge. Stay with us. We're back. Greg, you've had a hearing president at Gallaudet in the past, and it's worked fine. Why now? Why make the stand now?
Because now, well, what I mean is, in the past, the Board of Trustees have voted. Now that they have voted, we feel like we need to put pressure on that board, because we used to be very happy to have a hearing president, but Dr. Lee, for example, he did great things for us. Yes, that's fine, and that's enough. 124 years of hearing presidents, we feel, is enough. We feel that a deaf president, we're ready now. There's really no reason not to have a deaf president.
Would any of the hearing impaired candidates have been acceptable to you and to your colleagues in the student body? I don't mean to suggest that you necessarily speak for all of the hearing impaired at Gallaudet. I don't want to attribute that to you and whether you would want to accept that. But for you and for those of people who are active in the protest, would any of the hearing impaired people have been acceptable?
Yes, certainly, because either one of them would have had a lot of support from the students and many deaf people and the deaf community. That deaf president, if we had picked them, would have gotten a lot of support. And the most important thing is that that person would have been able to be motivated by us. And if that person had some weaknesses, then we could have respected that and asked to have people help him with that weakness and given them support. Also with Dr. Zinser, that person Dr. Zinser may need to have an assistant to help her with her lack of understanding of deafness.
Dr. Zinser is already taking sign courses. Have you had a special interest in the problems of the deaf before, Dr. Zinser?
Yes, for some time. I basically, though, bring to the university at this stage a broad background in academic administration. What my aim is, and I think what the aim of the Board of Trustees and the campus community is to provide the very best liberal arts education and graduate education and research opportunities concerning deafness and for the deaf and of the deaf. I believe that the university in its very special mission must have an individual who is able to bring a broad perspective from the academic background and from an administrative background that can help the university face the enormous challenges that are there in the years ahead. I do recognize and acknowledge very humbly that I do not know sign well at this time, that I do not understand what I need to know about the deaf culture and deaf education, and I am counting on the academic community there and the students there to help me learn. I don't have any illusions that that will be easy, but I do know that I bring a lot of other strengths to the university, and that for the university to provide the very best education for the students there at all levels, the elementary, the secondary, the collegiate, and through the graduate level, that there's a lot I can bring in helping the university assume its proper stand as a leader in the higher education community in general, as well as within the deaf community, which naturally it serves as a symbol of greatness for many, many people.
Let me raise this question with you, because I was talking, this subject has captured the attention of a lot of us who are not just curious about politics and foreign affairs and sports and show business. Something about this says something to a lot of Americans, and they respect you, and they know that this is a time that this country needs its best educators moving into positions of responsibility to run great institutions like Gallaudet. They also say, though, that this is a time in our country in which symbols are important, and there'll be another good university for Elizabeth Zinser to run, and here there is a heartfelt feeling on the part of so many students that the symbol is important. Why not respect their wishes on this and wait for the next call?
Yeah. The symbol is important, but the university's real responsibilities and the responsibilities of the president of the university, again, is to provide the leadership for the best education for the individuals and the constituency associated with that institution. In the best judgment of the Board of Trustees, they chose me for that role. I cannot comment, of course, and couldn't, nor would I, on the relative merits of all of the candidates that were considered for the position. But I do know that the Board of Trustees has the right and responsibility to make that choice in the best interest of the university. They have taken that action. I am personally privileged to be the individual invited to serve in that great role. But I also understand that there's a great deal of disappointment and hurt at the present time, and I hope that in time we can recover from that, and that the students, being, as I understand, fair and reasonable people, will be willing to talk with me and help me to be successful at Gallaudet University.
Some would say to you, Greg, why not try to work this out? The Board of Trustees has made its decision. Here is clearly a person that wants to make a difference. Why not sit down and try to work it out?
How? She is hearing. She's a hearing person. There's no way with a hearing person. There's no compromise.
Okay. If you're not going to compromise, what are you going to do?
We will continue to demonstrate until the Board of Trustees gives up or until Dr. Zinser resigns. We feel that we have been doing it that way, and for them, right now, they need to listen to our way. They need to listen to us. So far, they have not.
I thank all of you. Thank you very much, Greg. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to have you and to share these ideas. Night Watch continues. Back in a moment.
Who says you have to be young to fall in love? Up next, senior citizens reveling in the golden age of romance.
A little lipstick, a pat of powder, a bit of blush. The question is, will Cupid strike on Saturday night? You may think we're talking about teenagers. The fact of the matter is that 16 million American women over 65 are widowed, are divorced, and lonely. As correspondent Karen Burns reported on the CBS News broadcast West 57th, love is prime time for people like Dot Ladiansky.
I was downstairs making the chicken soup, and I knew he was dying. And I thought, what do you do when you lose your mate at this age? You think, well, romance is over. You never think about going to fall in love with anybody else at my age. I thought, here I am, 68 years old. What am I going to do?
Her widowed friends complained about the loneliness and the long nights at home, but Dot was determined. She went out to dinners and dances and dated as often as she could, but with little success. Then on a bus trip to Florida with other retirees, her luck changed.
That's a slow number, that's why.
His name is Walter Unger, a 78-year-old retired machinist from Philadelphia who was widowed after 42 years of marriage.
Are you going to drag me out on the floor again? How do I do that?
Do it. You're perfect.
Huh?
You're perfect.
Oh, come on now. You know doggone well there's 2 left feet and...
Why dance?
Forget the dance.
His wife had been dead for 9 years, and my husband had been dead for 2 years. But I just knew that I had to have him. Some widows would go through that one experience of losing one husband. It's a terrifying experience. They don't want to face it again. So they avoid any men. And they'll sacrifice their sexual desires rather than go through that terrible experience.
You don't know how much you're missing until you find someone you can really share all your pleasures with. And I mean all your pleasures. We don't have to account to anyone for whatever we do.
Year after year, Walter and Dot returned to Florida, to a trailer park for retirees, where they first fell in love.
I never had a man before my husband. I never knew another man. I married him when I was 29 and I was a virgin at 29. We went together for 8 years, but in my day, you just didn't do the things that they do today. And we married, and I was a virgin, and he was sick off and on. He had a very bad heart all his life, and there were times when it was pretty rough on the both of us, but we weathered it through. And with Walter, there was no waiting. There was no time for the mating game. We had no time to play around. We're too old to play with that stuff. I knew that if we'd have to get together, and we'd have to do it right away. And we couldn't lose any time.
I felt it wasn't for me to push it, to ask her or to make any suggestion, because that's the way I am, slow, you know.
We sat and talked, and we knew what was going to come about. And he said, I'm not going to rush you. I want you to decide when you're ready for me, but I'm ready right now. I said, well, I don't think I am. Then he came back the next day. The next night he came back, and I made dinner for us. We had dinner, and we sat there and talked a while, and the more I looked at him, it's not looks. It's something deeper than looks with Walter. He's such a terrific person. You can't help but be around him, but really knowing and not loving. And I decided, well, I want him. That was my decision.
And I think Dottie, somehow, she must have had already feelings in that direction, because she gave me 2 martinis, which was rather unusual, you know. One martini would have sent me high, and the second one sent me over the hill.
So I made the second martini, and he told me how much he enjoyed my dinner. He thanked me, and he got up and kissed me, and I took him by the hand, and I led him up to my bedroom.
Unbelievable thing happened. We just stripped ourselves without saying a word, without asking, without questions, and that was it.
Well, when we awoke in the morning, the both of us looked, and we said it looked like a television scene from a soap opera. Everything was thrown skittered and all over the floor. But we knew then that we really wanted each other.
As for Walter and Dot, they'll celebrate their 4th anniversary this year.
Love is eternal. Karen Burns reporting for West 57th. Nightwatch continues. Back in a moment. That's our broadcast for this Wednesday. Coming up this week, predicting who will be president. Some say this is the year of the donkey, claiming the economy is the reason a Democrat will win. We'll get the views of conservative commentator Pat Buchanan and journalist Fred Barnes from the New Republic magazine. Also, author Thomas Flanagan on his long-awaited second novel, The Tenets of Time, a sweeping view of a pivotal time in Irish history, and the Soviet boy who said no to going home. Today, he is an American citizen. In the meantime, for all of us here at Nightwatch, I'm Charlie Rose in Washington.